His name is Naaman. Our introduction to him is brief and all the more forceful for its brevity. We're told he commands the army of the king of Aram. He's a great man, and he's in high favor because he does his job well, that is, he wins battles. Naaman, at whose command the horses and the chariots go forth to attack the enemy. Naaman, this mighty warrior cloaked in armor to protect him from the arrows that come his way. But beneath the armor hides a tender wound. Our translation today calls it a skin disease, others call it leprosy. An infection that, left untreated, could cripple his hands and his feet, and in those days it was considered both incurable and highly contagious, and so the disease cut you off not only from your own sensory world, but also from everyone around you. When he put on his coat of armor in the morning light, it protected Naaman from his enemies. And perhaps it hid his wound from his friends and associates in the noonday sun. But we all know what it's like at the end of the day. And when night fell in the hidden chambers of his bedroom when no one was looking, Naaman would remove his armor and reveal the wound that refused to go away, slowly erasing his ability to feel anything at all. Down in the basement, in the subterranean reality of this story, a different narrative emerges. In one of their attacks on Israel, Naaman's army takes a prisoner of war, namely a young girl, and she's brought to serve as Naaman's wife. Now, as an aside, there's a dozen sermons to be given here. How here's a young woman who's taken against her will. We don't know her name. She's taken into servitude. Her life is thrown away. Nevertheless, and there's a great God word for you, nevertheless, God has not forgotten her. For her part, this young girl listens and pays attention because that's her job, is to know what's going on in the house. And in a circumstance in which anyone would forgive her for being bitter, she's a prisoner of war. She chooses to bless and not curse. And with the power of her voice, she remembers a prophet back home who she's sure could cure her archenemy and captor. And she tells him about it. And her word, her one line in the play, changes the trajectory of the whole story. The thing about being a servant is that you overhear everything. Because at some point you just blend into the wallpaper and people forget you're there, and they just say stuff. When I was younger, I worked for a small catering company for a time. I liked being around the carefulness of the food preparation and then contrast that with the hubbub of the party itself. I liked the banter among the catering staff, and most of all, I think I liked paying attention, trying to anticipate guests' needs, clearing plates and glasses and doing dishes and moving silently through a noisy crowd, no one paying you any mind. The woman I worked for was very people smart, and I'll never forget what she said to me one day. She said, "When you put on black and white, you disappear." We donned those white tuxedo shirts of polyester, black bow ties, and black pants, not to stand out, but to blend in. A uniform that communicated without saying anything that if you had an issue, that was who to talk to. The lines were very clear. We were neither the hosts nor the guests, but rather those who wordlessly navigated that space in between. If there was a mess, we cleaned it up. Once the dishes were clean and put away and not before, then you got paid. We were always the last ones to leave. And I loved that for some reason, and I found fellowship in that shared hidden service among those whose job description was also to be invisible. It was not till many years later that I dressed once more in a uniform of black and white, where my job was to move silently through the crowd to see who needed more bread or wine, to make sure the candles got lit, to clean up the messes that had spilled, to dry off the cup with a towel, to acknowledge that my job description was not host or guest, but as the one who worked that in-between space. And here, too, I found joy and fellowship among those who know that what they're here to do is to serve. And I'll tell you the truth, the view is different when you're wearing black and white. Back to Naaman. If you think about it, it's crazy. On the unsubstantiated rumor from a prisoner of war that was invisible to him, Naaman chose to believe that someone could cure him. And so our army commander asks leave from the king, gets his field trip permission form signed, and off he goes. Like many of those, like many of us maybe, accustomed to making our own way in the world, Naaman packs a fat wallet. He knows that you get what you pay for, and he thinks and getting healed, if it's going to happen, is going to cost a fortune. So he and his entourage make their way to the entrance of the prophet Elisha's house, and they park outside, and Elisha doesn't even. He sends a messenger who tells Naaman, "Go wash in the river Jordan 7 times, and your flesh will be restored, and you shall be clean." I don't know why Elisha doesn't come personally, but Naaman does not take it well. For army commander Naaman is used to giving commands, not taking them. And he takes offense at Elisha giving instructions through a servant. And in his tantrum, Naaman reveals that if he was going to pay for this, he wanted his money's worth. I want the July 1st fireworks, the bandstand, the top shouting and the waving and the hoopla, and then at the right moment, the magic cure to come. Then he makes a probably racist comment and basically says, "I could have just done this back home and with way less fuss," and he stomps off in a rage. People of God, let me say this. Rage and the suit of armor go hand in hand. Many of us have had to don a suit of armor to get through the pandemic, through our work, through home, through staying 6 feet apart. And it is true that the coat of mail does its job well. It protects us from the enemies and keeps them at bay. And it deflects the arrows of those who would do us harm. But that hard shell sometimes comes at a cost and may prevent us from being healed, from letting God or our neighbor close enough to just touch us. It may keep us from hearing the word of the prophet or the servant to remove our armor and draw close to the water's edge. Because if you made it through 3 years with the armor on, it's scary as hell to take it off. Once more, it's the voice of the servants who saved the day, who chase after him and say, "Boss, if the prophet had commanded you to do something hard, wouldn't you have done it? Shouldn't you just do the easy thing then when all he's asking you to do is wash and be clean? In a world of kings and commanders, in a world of no free lunch, everything seems like it has to be hard fought. We want to pay for what we need, sometimes keep it transactional with God. We make bets. God, if you could just help me with such and such, I promise I'll. Meanwhile, all that we busy ourselves attempting to pay for, God is trying to give us for free. That's the definition of grace. All we are trying desperately to earn or prove or pay for, God has already given us for free. And if you and I believed that even 10% to be true, our entire life would change. Some of us have been around church for a long time, but we've never removed our coat of armor. Others of us have donned it more recently to get through a really hard stretch, and we're not sure what it would look like to take it off. And we've had trouble trusting the voice of that original servant who said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will refresh you. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Until one day, when the weight and the heat of the armor is just too much and the promise of healing is like a tall glass of water. And so we take the courage to take off our armor, to wade down into the cold water, to wash and be made clean. That armor off, and to plunge himself 7 times in the river of God. They say his skin was restored and he looked like a kid again. And he was made clean.